and welcome. I am Sylvan Lane, Economics and Financial Policy Reporter at The Hill. Thank you for joining us for our program today, Principled Profit, The Hill's ESG Summit. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Schneider Electric, for their support of today's event. Environmental, social, and corporate governance, or ESG investing, is the increasingly popular inclination of investors to make capital decisions based not only on likely financial return, but also with an eye toward investing in companies perceived to be creating social good. Earlier this year, the Securities and Exchange Commission proposed 2 rule changes that would prevent misleading or deceptive claims by U.S. funds on their ESG qualifications and increase disclosure requirements for those funds. The proposals come amid mounting concerns that some funds seeking to profit from the rise in ESG investing practices have misled shareholders over what's in their holdings, a practice known as greenwashing. Our show today will delve into the new SEC rules, the growing demand of ESG, and how it's transforming the business and investment landscape. But before we get underway, a few housekeeping notes. You can tweet us at The Hill Events using the hashtag TheHillESG. We are broadcasting live, and we will be taking your questions throughout the program. My first guest today is Congressman Andy Levin, a Democrat from Michigan and a member of the House Education and Labor Committee. Congressman Levin, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, Sylvan, thanks for having me, and I'm so glad you're doing this.
Of course. So I want to launch in with, kind of a general question about the whole point of ESG investing. And, from your perspective, what do ESG investment funds or opportunities bring in terms of opportunities for investors to make a difference?
Well, the potential is just huge. ESG investments have been growing. In 2021, ESG-focused exchange-traded funds rose on a global basis by 53% to $2.7 trillion. So why is this happening? What does it bring? And basically, I think that working people, particularly younger ones who have pensions, who have 401ks, other investors, they want to invest their values to promote a more sustainable planet, workers' rights, good corporate governance. And we've seen that investing in the ESG way doesn't mean a loss of returns, quite the opposite. Numerous studies have shown that sustainable investing yields returns comparable to or greater than traditional investing. And I think it's really important, Sylvan, not just to sort of give people what they want, but to get more young people in the game. We know there's a huge problem in this country of people not saving enough for their retirement, and especially not starting when they're young enough. And if people can begin investing in saying, wow, I want to move this world to carbon neutrality. I want to make sure there aren't human rights violations in the supply chain of what I'm buying or what I'm investing in, then I think they can make a real difference in how our economy works. And also, it's really important that they save for their retirement. So I want to motivate them to get in the game.
Now, Congressman, you mentioned quite a few different issues that kind of cover the whole umbrella of ESG. And I was wondering, from your perspective as a policymaker, why do you think there's been such an increase in interest in ESG funds and investment opportunities?
Well, I think a couple reasons. One, there's no longer really any room for debate about the overheating of this planet. It is a 5-alarm emergency. We've got to change everything about the way we move about this planet, we live on it, our buildings, our manufacturing, our transportation, our land use, our forests, agriculture, everything. And so investing's got to be a big part of that. So I think that is one big factor. And secondly, on a broader basis, I think the emerging, generation of young adults really feels like, hey, I want everything I do to reflect my values. And I think that's a big driver of it. So it's about climate change, but it's about something broader than that they want their money that they put into saving for their retirement to be clean, to reflect their values in the world, whether they're religious or humanist, it really doesn't matter, right? It's about people feeling like they can be true to themselves and their vision for the world.
Now, Congressman, when it comes to being able to be true to themselves and their vision for the world, obviously investors are wading through this new world without necessarily a super clear idea of what they're getting into. Do you think that folks interested in investing in ESG have enough information and enough clarity to be able to determine where their money is actually going and whether it's making the difference that they want to make?
Well, I think we have a lot more work to do there. So there are some opportunities, but I've introduced legislation about this because I think it's important that we do more work. So I have two bills because they govern, different areas of the investment landscape. One is the Sustainable Investment Policies Act, which regulates independent investment advisors, and the other is the Retirees Sustainable Investment Opportunities Act that governs your ERISA. And as you mentioned, I'm on the Education Labor Committee and the Help Subcommittee, which has jurisdiction there. So that's why I'm so interested in this. And what we have to do is say that that we want plans to offer ESG options. We want there to be clarity about some guardrails. So we can't have this greenwashing. We can't have these phony claims. We have to have some standards. I'm glad the SEC is stepping up, like with its investigation of Goldman Sachs and so forth. But I think that Congress should also act to provide legislation to put a framework around this so that investors can really have confidence that their ESG investments are doing what they say they're doing.
When it comes to developing that confidence too, we just talked a little bit about the SEC regulations that have been proposed to try to bring some clarity to this space. I was wondering if you thought the SEC was moving in the right direction and if there's anything more that they should be doing to kind of increase transparency and help folks get a better handle on ESG investments.
Well, I think they are moving in the right direction, but this has been an area, we can't just allow empty claims here. We need real transparency in supply chains, in sourcing of materials, in the factories around the world that companies may be using to produce goods, in their raw materials. And there are a lot of advances going on in this regard, but there's also a great amount of opportunity for people not being truthful or honest or forthcoming about it. So I think it's very important that the SEC act. And as I say, I think it's also important for us to act in Congress so that we encourage more of this at the same time that we give investors confidence that when they make an ESG investment, that it really is advancing their values instead of just making money for a fund that is, trying to capture people's interest without really delivering the goods they're looking for.
Now, Congressman, I know I don't need to tell you, but there is, considerable political concern among some of your Republican colleagues about ESG investing proposals and disclosure in general. Just in terms of whether or not companies should be focused on these issues and whether or not it's appropriate for financial regulators to lay out what kinds of information in terms of ESG-related issues companies should be laying out. And I was wondering if you think it's possible for businesses to both focus on profits while also putting out information about ESG that might align with some of these broader societal goals.
Well, Sylvan, I'm telling you, I think this is real bottom line stuff here. It's not just feel good or, something about somebody's morality that's not based in economics. If you have fundamental, child labor in your supply chain, that's going to come back to bite you. And I, as an investor, am going to be harmed by that. And especially on environmental sustainability, people have a right to know that they're investing in companies that are going to be profitable as we move into a carbon-free economy. And I think the SEC and other regulators are duty-bound at this point in the climate change emergency to give investors as much information as they can, so everyday folks can invest their money and not have it come back to bite them 10 years down the road when they've invested in a company that's really not sustainable, and their investment performs poorly because they lacked information they should have had access to. So I think this is very practical and very important for making sure that people can realize the returns they want, in addition to reflecting their values.
Now, Congressman, you mentioned a little bit about what can happen to a company if it's not equipped for the climate change that we've seen so far, but there's also an issue of so-called transition risk. What happens to the financial system as the world on whole starts to move more toward carbon neutral sources of fuel? And I was wondering if you think the U.S. financial system, as it stands right now, is equipped to handle these types of changes based on the amount of information we're getting from companies under the current regulatory regime?
Well, I mean, one good thing, I worry about it a lot, Sylvan. One good thing is that the banks and other financial entities have an interest in getting this right. But I think we need to have a lot more oversight over this, and we have to do a lot more work, both the regulatory agencies and Congress, to figure out how we can make this transition smoothly, or as smoothly as possible, so that it becomes an engine of economic growth and prosperity rather than having people get hurt. And if people do get hurt, almost inevitably, the people who get hurt the most are poor people, people of color, people who have the least access to information or the least power in investment markets. So I'm very keen on this transition being a just transition, even in this financial aspect of things, and investment aspect.
Congressman, my last question for you. We've talked a lot about the public sector and what the government should be doing, but I wanted to ask you too, what if you've been happy with how companies have responded so far to the growing push for ESG, and if there's anything else you would like to see companies take up on their own instead of having the government have to come in with regulations and rules to make that happen?
Well, I personally don't think that there is a big contradiction between strong and clear policies and vibrant capitalism. And so I think that, strong and clear policies are actually good. But what I would say to the companies is, as just a regular person who watches, when companies develop very strong sustainability policies and real transparency, and they show all the information to their investors and other stakeholders, it really makes a difference, and you can tell. So I'm in favor of more strong policy to help this developing area continue to grow. But I would encourage companies to focus on this, to invest in it, and to treat it as a matter of integrity, just as important as you do your bookkeeping or other areas that you've got to get right. Because this is something that investors are not going to turn away from. It's going to be really important for the health of your company going forward.
Congressman Andy Levin, Democrat from Michigan, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Sylvan. Good luck with your event.